My parents said I would never be strong enough to run the family business. In their eyes, my golden sister was the perfect child, the one destined to inherit and take Carter and Daughters to the top. So I walked away, started a rival company, and crushed them. Have you ever been overlooked, compared, or dismissed by your own family? Tell me where in the world you are watching this from and what time it is right now. Share it in the comments, because I truly want to see how far this story will travel. Hi, my name is Olivia Carter, 33 years old, born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. If someone asked me what shaped my life the most, I would not hesitate to say it was my family, but not in the beautiful way most people imagine. My parents owned Carter and Daughters, a mid-sized civil and commercial construction company with over 40 employees, running for more than 2 decades and considered the pride of our lineage. To outsiders, we looked like a respectable, united family, preparing the next generation to carry on the business. But behind that polished image, favoritism and deep divisions created cracks only those inside the family could truly feel. The chosen one, the child my parents placed all their hopes on, was never me. It was Vanessa Carter, my younger sister by 2 years. Vanessa was always called perfect, beautiful, charismatic, and a natural when it came to speaking in front of a crowd. Even in high school, she shined like a star. Vanessa was captain of the cheerleading team, always smiling radiantly in yearbook photos, surrounded by a wide circle of friends. Meanwhile, I, the eldest daughter, chose a quieter path. I spent most of my time in STEM labs, joined math and science clubs, and competed in academic tournaments. I earned full scholarships, collected medals and awards, while Vanessa was celebrated simply for her looks and charm. Evenings at home often turned family dinners into invisible stages of comparison. My father would recount meetings with business partners and conclude that Vanessa had natural leadership qualities, simply because she could make people laugh easily. My mother would gently add, "She has the Carter charisma running in her veins." And when it came to me, they only offered shallow praise. Olivia is good with numbers, she can do the behind-the-scenes work. Not once did I ever hear the word leader attached to my name. I still remember one night during my senior year of high school. I had just received an invitation to attend a competitive summer engineering program for outstanding young women. Excited, I brought the letter home, expecting my parents to beam with pride. But at dinner, my father barely glanced at the paper before setting it aside, steering the conversation to Vanessa being chosen as the face of the cheer squad for the spring festival. "That's what really matters," he said. "She knows how to show up in front of people, how to build credibility. Olivia, you're fine as support, but not everyone is meant to lead. You're too soft." His words landed in my ears like a final verdict. In truth, I never completely blamed Vanessa. My sister was simply living the path our parents had drawn for her, becoming the shining jewel, the model of strength in their eyes. What hurt me most was knowing that no matter how hard I worked, how much I studied, or what I achieved, it was always treated as something extra, never enough to lead. I was the shadow, the one behind the scenes, the support girl, a label that clung to me throughout my youth. I graduated college with honors in project management and finance, paired with courses in construction engineering. My heart was full of hope, believing this would be my chance to finally prove myself to my family. The day I returned to Carter and Daughters, standing before the old office building with its bronze sign faded by time, I felt certain that my preparation would bring real change. I walked in with my laptop in hand, carrying a head full of ideas, streamlining processes, cutting costs, improving efficiency. Yet, from the very first days, I realized that my passion was nothing more than a small flame, surrounded and smothered by the cold walls of prejudice and stubborn tradition. The company was still running on outdated methods, with piles of paper records and cost reports, either handwritten or hastily typed into scattered Excel files. I spent countless late nights quietly analyzing every invoice and expense sheet until I uncovered the truth. We were wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars each year simply because of sloppy processes. Determined to make a difference, I built an automated expense tracking system myself, integrating basic management software so employees only needed to enter figures once and the system would update instantly. Within just 6 months, the company had cut nearly 15% of its operating costs, no small figure for a mid-sized business. I remember the nervous excitement as I walked into the boardroom with my report in hand, convinced this was the moment I could finally prove my worth. But after I presented everything, my father merely gave a cold nod and turned to Vanessa. "You have a meeting with the new client this afternoon, right? Remember to wear the blue dress. It suits you perfectly." The entire room laughed, while I sat frozen, my accomplishment discarded like an unnecessary footnote. Not a single word of praise, not even a handshake of acknowledgement. Just a shrug, as if the numbers I had brought to the table meant nothing compared to my sister's smile. I didn't give up. I pushed forward with a proposal to implement ERP, a full enterprise resource planning system that would connect every department, from accounting and HR to construction. I drew process maps, broke down the benefits in detail, even found a software vendor willing to give us a free trial. But my father's response was always the same. "Construction is about strength, Olivia. It doesn't live on a computer screen. Don't turn this company into a pile of complicated software." He said it with irritation, as if my ideas were nothing more than an attempt to dismantle the traditions he had worked so hard to build. While I struggled each day to modernize the company, Vanessa drifted through her responsibilities like a gentle breeze. She was often late or absent from critical meetings. Whenever I hinted that this hurt our progress, my parents instantly defended her. "She's busy networking with clients, and that's just as important." I looked around the conference room and saw colleagues' hesitant eyes. Some wanted to nod in agreement with me, but they stayed silent, knowing exactly where the real power lay. One time, during a key strategy meeting, Vanessa showed up nearly 40 minutes late. I was almost finished presenting the entire project plan, complete with cost charts and detailed timelines. The door opened, and she walked in with a radiant smile, her hair softly curled, her fitted dress drawing every pair of eyes in the room. My father immediately stopped me. "Let's wait for Vanessa to settle, then we'll continue." I sat down, and he turned to her with a proud smile. "Daughter, today you look every bit like a natural leader." With just a smile, Vanessa captured the entire room, while my week of sleepless nights was brushed aside like an assignment that held no value. Months passed, and the label support girl stuck to me tighter and tighter. I was the one behind the scenes, silently clearing the way for others to step onto the stage. I handled crises when projects fell behind schedule, resolved contract disputes, and balanced the budget when costs spiraled. But when success came, the spotlight always shone on Vanessa. She only had to show up with a charming smile, raise a glass at company parties, and she was immediately hailed as the future of Carter and Daughters. Many nights I lay awake, wondering where I had gone wrong. I had the degree, the experience, the vision. I loved construction not just for the numbers but for the value it brought to the community, schools, hospitals, buildings where people live and work. Yet in my family's eyes, all of that turned me into someone who was good with numbers, but not strong enough to lead. I gradually realized that in their world, strength didn't come from intelligence or persistence, but from image, dominance, and what they called authority. By that definition, I was never considered worthy. The longer it went on, the more I felt imprisoned in a role that was never mine. I was like a hidden gear in a machine, keeping everything running smoothly yet never being seen. No matter how much I turned, the spotlight always belonged to Vanessa. And in that silence of being dismissed, in that ever-thickening shadow, a small flame inside me began to spark on a night that was supposed to be a family celebration. That evening, Chicago glowed with lights as if the whole city were celebrating my father's 60th birthday. The riverside restaurant he had chosen was lavishly decorated with white roses, flickering candles, and ivory tablecloths. I walked in with a fragile hope that this might be the night my father reflected on the journey, that he would acknowledge what I had done for the company over the past 10 years. I wasn't asking for grand praise, only a nod, a mention in front of the many clients and partners watching. But I was wrong, bitterly wrong. The party buzzed with noise, guests laughing and toasting, their glasses clinking in the golden light. I sat at the second table, not too close to the stage, but close enough to see my father in his dark blue suit, silver hair neatly combed, standing in the center like a general. Beside him was Vanessa, in a fitted red dress sparkling like a rare jewel, striding proudly at his side. Together, they looked like the perfect symbol of power and glory, while I remained a blurred shadow, seated among employees I had once guided and supported. When the birthday cake was brought out, the entire hall erupted in applause. My father raised his glass, his voice ringing out with clarity. "Thank you all for being here tonight. 60 years of life, and what I am most proud of is not only building Carter and Daughters, but also having a worthy successor to carry on this legacy." He paused, his eyes settling on Vanessa, his smile widening. From this day forward, Vanessa Carter will officially be prepared to become the next CEO of Carter and Daughters. The sound of clapping burst like thunder, cheers echoing in my ears like sharp blades. I froze, my heart pounding wildly, my hands trembling beneath the table. 10 years of effort, those sleepless nights in the office perfecting plans, those times I pulled the company back from disastrous contracts, all of it vanished in that single moment. Not one mention of my name. Not a single word of thanks. Only the cold silence reserved for the daughter deemed unworthy. I remember the lump in my throat as I watched Vanessa step onto the stage, accepting hugs and congratulations. She smiled radiantly, raising her glass as if the future already belonged to her. I lowered my head, forcing back tears, while at my table a few colleagues glanced at me with quiet pity. But no one said a word. Everyone knew exactly where the power resided, and silence was the safest choice. After the party, I forced myself to stay calm and waited until everyone had left before approaching my father. In the private room behind the restaurant where he was loosening his tie, I spoke up, my voice trembling but firm. "Father, what about me? I've given 10 years of my life to this company. Why was there not a single mention of me?" He looked up at me with a steady, unhesitating gaze. "Olivia, you are not strong enough to lead this company. You're good with numbers, good at managing details, but leadership requires presence. People need to feel strength the moment someone walks into a room. Vanessa has that. You don't." I froze. His words felt like nails being hammered into my chest. "Not strong enough?" I repeated, my voice catching. "Do you remember who designed the cost system that saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars? Who fixed the mess when Vanessa missed the hospital contract, staying up 3 nights negotiating the terms? Who kept the company afloat when projects fell behind?" He waved his hand dismissively, his tone sneering. "That's backstage work. Leaders don't get bogged down in that stuff. A leader is someone who commands attention the moment they enter a room, who immediately takes up the space. Vanessa does that. You never will." I stood there with my hands clenched so tight my nails left marks in my skin. For years I had hoped he would one day recognize my true worth, but now, standing before me, he had made it painfully clear. In his eyes, I would always remain a shadow, someone good with numbers but too weak to lead. That night, I left the restaurant alone, walking through the cold Chicago streets, the wind stinging my face. The laughter and chatter from the party still echoed behind me, blending with the sound of my heart shattering. I knew then that the last shred of faith I had in my family had completely collapsed. And in that devastation, a quiet resolve took shape. If they would never acknowledge me, then I would carve my own path to prove my worth, with the very strength they had denied me. The next morning, I walked into the Carter and Daughters office for the final time with a strange sense of calm. I hadn't slept a minute the night before. I had simply lain awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying my father's words over and over in my head. "You're not strong enough. You belong in the background." By the time the Chicago sky turned pink with dawn, I knew I couldn't remain in that vicious cycle another day. I could either stay, continue being the invisible foundation that propped up the company, and watch Vanessa rise on the back of my labor, or I could step out and build a summit of my own, one they could never reach. I chose the second path. I arrived earlier than usual, as had always been my habit. The receptionist looked surprised to see me carrying an envelope, but asked no questions. I walked straight into my father's office. He was sitting behind his dark wooden desk, eyes buried in the pile of paperwork. When I placed the envelope down, he looked up with a flicker of irritation. "What's this?" he asked. I drew in a deep breath, steadying my voice. "My resignation letter. I'm leaving Carter and Daughters today." The room fell into silence for a few seconds. My father stared at me as if he had just heard something absurd, then he let out a dry laugh. "Are you joking, Olivia? You've never worked anywhere else. Your entire life has been this company. Where do you think you're going to go?" I answered, each word steady and deliberate. "If I'm not strong enough to lead this company, then I will build another one stronger." With that, I turned and walked out, not waiting for his reaction. What my father didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for a long time. During all my years at Carter and Daughters, I had worked hard while quietly observing. I documented every process, from project management to negotiating with suppliers. I stored cost data, identifying the fatal weaknesses in his leadership. I maintained my own relationships with loyal clients, the ones who knew that when Olivia was involved, projects ran smoother. I attended industry conferences, studying modern models from the most advanced companies, especially the growing trend of digital technology in construction management. In other words, I had been quietly laying the groundwork for independence, waiting only for the right moment to step out. And that moment had finally come. The very first thing I did was go to Chicago City Hall and file the paperwork to establish my own company. I had thought long and hard about the name, and in the end, I chose Summit Construction Solutions. Summit symbolized the peak I was aiming for, not just building structures, but building a position at the very top. Solutions emphasized the philosophy I wanted to live by, not selling strength, not selling image, but selling the ability to truly solve problems. When I signed my name on the registration form, my hand trembled not from fear but from excitement. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free, no longer bound by the judgmental eyes of my family. The first office of Summit Construction Solutions was just over 500 square feet, tucked inside an old office complex on the north side of Chicago, right off the highway. Every morning when I walked in, sunlight filtered through a window pane yellowed with age. Falling onto the wall, I had repainted myself in a simple white. Inside, there were only 3 wooden desks I had bought from a liquidation store, a handful of worn swivel chairs, and a whiteboard hanging on the wall where I mapped out plans. That was all I had, aside from ambition and determination. But to me, that space was the beginning of a new journey, the place where I could build a company founded on the very values Carter and Daughters had never recognized. My first 2 employees, Miguel and Hannah, had both once worked at Carter and Daughters. Miguel was a skilled middle-aged mason of Mexican heritage, a man Vanessa had once berated harshly just for delivering the wrong batch of bricks. Hannah was a young engineer, fresh out of college, whom my father had dismissed as too inexperienced, never giving her the chance to prove herself. They came to me because they believed I would lead differently, and I did not let them down. From the very first day, I told them plainly, Summit will be built on 3 things: transparency, technology, and respect for employees. If we can hold to those 3, we will stand apart. They nodded, their eyes shining with a kind of faith I had never seen in them back when they worked under my father. To turn those words into reality, I poured nearly all of my modest capital into technology. I bought 3 tablets for the workers and installed construction management software so progress could be updated in real time. I paid for an advanced cost estimation system capable of analyzing data and projecting needs with pinpoint accuracy, even down to the number of screws required. I implemented online reporting software that allowed clients to track construction progress day by day without ever needing to call. These were the very ideas I had once proposed to Carter and Daughters, always dismissed with the same line. Construction is about strength, not computer screens. Now, those very tools became the foundation of Summit. Summit's very first project was a modest $20,000 contract, renovating the O'Donnell family's kitchen in the Chicago suburbs. Many people told me I was foolish to take on something so small, but I knew this wasn't about money, it was about proving what we could do. I personally went to the site, used software to create a 3D model of the new kitchen, and provided a cost breakdown down to the very last tile and fixture. The O'Donnells were astonished. They had never been treated with such professionalism, especially for a small-scale job. They signed the contract on the spot, their eyes filled with trust. For 3 weeks of construction, I was on site every single day. Miguel led the crew, updating progress and material status directly on his tablet. Hannah oversaw the technical details, ensuring every measurement aligned with the design. As for me, I was both manager and motivator, bringing coffee to the team in the early mornings, sitting with them to troubleshoot whenever issues arose. Not a single step was overlooked, not a single promise left unkept. When the kitchen was finally completed, every tile gleamed under the lights, every cabinet door fit seamlessly without a gap. The O'Donnell family could hardly believe their eyes. At their small celebration dinner in the brand new kitchen, Mrs. O'Donnell held my hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "Olivia, this is the first time I felt a contractor treated us like people, not just a wallet. Thank you." Her words meant more to me than any check. They even shared photos of the finished kitchen on social media, posting a heartfelt endorsement of Summit. Before long, that post spread across the local community. The phone in my tiny office wouldn't stop ringing calls from neighbors, their friends, even a few small business owners curious about this brand new company making waves. That night, when I returned to the office, I sat alone under the soft yellow light, staring at the whiteboard where I had written the words, Summit. Transparency, technology, respect. A powerful sense of conviction rose in me like never before. I was on the right path. We had only just begun, but the difference was already undeniable. Carter and Daughters might have history, a long-standing reputation in the industry, but they didn't have what I had planted from the very first day. The absolute trust of clients and the loyalty of employees. And I knew, from that single $20,000 kitchen renovation, Summit would climb to heights they could never reach. After the kitchen project's success, I knew I couldn't remain in the small contract cycle. If Summit was going to stand apart, I had to choose a road Carter and Daughters had never dared to take. My father always focused on residential homes, housing developments, and the occasional simple commercial project. He avoided jobs with strict standards like healthcare and education. Too much hassle, too many regulations, not worth the effort, he would say, and let opportunities pass by. But to me, that avoidance created a gap I could step into. I believed that with technology as our backbone and transparency as our method, Summit could meet the high demands most traditional companies shied away from. I threw myself into studying the construction standards for hospitals, clinics, and schools. Night after night, I read OSHA guidelines, infection control requirements, and the specialized ventilation systems needed in medical facilities. Hannah took on the research of technical codes, while I attended every workshop offered to contractors interested in bidding on public projects. Miguel reached out to friends in the trades to find workers willing to test themselves on more demanding jobs. For months, we worked relentlessly, as if preparing for the most important exam of our lives, an exam where the reward wasn't just a contract, but a new place in the industry. The opportunity came when a large private clinic in the Chicago suburbs announced plans to renovate its entire infrastructure. The contract was valued at $500,000, 25 times the size of our very first project. I knew my father would pass on it because Carter and Daughters never dared to deal with dozens of pages of technical requirements and complex inspection protocols. But for Summit, it was a golden chance. Hannah and I prepared a proposal over 200 pages long, outlining every detail. Construction timelines, certified materials, medical waste disposal procedures, and an online reporting system for the clinic's management team. Not a single detail was overlooked. On the day we presented to the board, I brought a projector, 3D models, and tablets so they could test the progress tracking software themselves. When they asked about costs, I showed them a breakdown of every dollar, along with savings we could deliver by optimizing transport and staffing. I saw their eyes light up not because I made lofty promises, but because, for the first time, they saw a contractor offering absolute transparency. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. The clinic's director said, "Olivia, we're choosing Summit. Your proposal outshined every other bid." I sat frozen for a few seconds, then burst into tears. This wasn't just our first major contract, it was the milestone that proved I had finally stepped out of my family's shadow and claimed my own place. The project lasted nearly 4 months. In the early days, we faced countless challenges: strict safety inspections, overlapping permits, and unforgiving deadlines. But thanks to our modern management system, every step was monitored in real time. Each morning, Miguel updated progress on his tablet. Each evening, Hannah sent automated reports to the clinic. I personally met with the management team every week, showing them that we were running 2 weeks ahead of schedule. And when the project wrapped, the final numbers stunned everyone. We not only delivered early, but we also saved 10% of the projected budget. At the clinic's grand reopening, the director took my hand in front of staff and patients and declared, "Summit works like it belongs in the 21st century, while so many other companies are still stuck in the last." I knew he was pointing at Carter and Daughters, who had also bid but were eliminated in the very first round. His words spread quickly through the community, becoming the most valuable advertisement I could ever ask for, a testimonial from a tough client who was completely satisfied. After that success, the phone in my office almost never stopped ringing. Schools, health centers, even a small suburban hospital reached out to inquire. They weren't just looking for a contractor, they wanted a partner who understood responsibility, who offered transparency in every expense, and who could meet the highest standards. Summit, once an unknown name, was suddenly becoming the top choice in the very field my father had always avoided. After the clinic project's resounding success, I knew Summit couldn't stop there. To grow sustainably, we had to break deeper into the market that had long been Carter and Daughters' bread and butter, the longtime clients I had personally served while working for my family. These were manufacturers, retail chains, and office building managers across Chicago and the surrounding areas. I knew each of them well, their worries, their frustrations, because for 12 years I had been the one behind the scenes preparing reports, answering midnight phone calls, and fixing problems when projects went off track. Carter and Daughters had earned their contracts partly because of its long history, but keeping them satisfied was largely the result of my invisible labor. And now, standing on my own, I was ready to knock on their doors again, but this time as a true leader. The first client I targeted was Lakeshore Properties, a company managing 3 large apartment complexes on Chicago's North Side. I had worked directly with Daniel, their head of maintenance, for years. I still remembered how often he complained that Carter and Daughters only reacted when problems arose, patching things up instead of offering long-term maintenance solutions. This time, I set up a meeting with him and brought Summit's new proposal. Sitting across the table, I introduced the concept of predictive maintenance, using software to monitor the life cycle of materials and equipment, creating replacement schedules before failures happened. I opened my laptop and showed him a transparent dashboard clients could access anytime, displaying everything from labor hours to material consumption in real time. Finally, I presented a deadline guarantee with penalty clauses. If Summit missed deadlines, we would reduce our service fees proportionally. It was something Carter and Daughters had never dared to sign because they didn't trust their own management systems. Daniel studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Olivia, you really are working like you belong in the 21st century. We want to try a contract with Summit." I'll leave. Within just a few months, Lakeshore Properties officially terminated its contract with Carter and Daughters, a deal that had once brought my family's company over $300,000 a year. Word spread quickly through the industry. Competitors, subcontractors, even workers in the trades began to whisper. Carter and Daughters was losing clients, while Summit was on the rise. I didn't stop there. I reached out to Northline Manufacturing, a mechanical parts company I had once saved from a disastrous delay. I reminded them of that night when I stayed up calculating a new delivery schedule so they could meet their deadline. This time, I didn't just promise with words, I showed them an online tracking system where they could see the project's progress every single day. After only 2 meetings, they signed a new contract with Summit worth $400,000 annually. One by one, familiar clients left Carter and Daughters and came to me. Not because I was cheaper, in fact, my prices were often equal to or higher than theirs, but because I offered what they had long craved: transparency, certainty, and the feeling of being respected. I turned every contract into a clear commitment, not just a handshake and a few faded papers. And clients, exhausted by my father and Vanessa's outdated way of doing business, quickly saw the difference. Meanwhile, at Carter and Daughters, things were falling apart. Friends who still worked there told me the office had grown tense, meetings filled with shouting matches. Vanessa often showed up late, left early, and when employees complained, she just smirked. "I have more important things to do." My father continued to cover for her, insisting, "She's working on client relationships." But what clients? When every single contract was slipping into my hands. One afternoon, I happened to run into Mr. Miller, a man who had been a loyal Carter and Daughters client for more than a decade at a construction association event. He clapped me on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Olivia, I switched over to working with Summit just last month. Honestly, it was the smartest decision our company has made in years. Your detailed reports and professionalism make it impossible for us to go back to the old way of doing things." Carter and Daughters. They're still stuck in the last century. Hearing that, I felt both pride and bitterness. Pride that my efforts were finally being recognized. Bitterness that these words could have been mine years ago, if only my father had ever acknowledged my true worth. But he never did. Even as the company began losing major clients and revenue plummeted, my father refused to admit his mistakes. He clung to the illusion that Vanessa just needed more time to prove herself. He still told everyone that Summit was nothing more than one of my impulsive whims, that soon I would fail and come crawling back for forgiveness. But numbers don't lie, and the day was fast approaching when I would force him to face that truth. One late afternoon in March, as I was meeting with Hannah and Miguel in the small conference room of our new Summit office, the receptionist knocked on the door, her voice trembling. "Olivia, there's a man here asking to see you. He says he's your father." I froze, my heart pounding, then nodded. "Let him in." The door swung open, and my father stepped inside, once a towering figure, now looking gaunt, his silver hair disheveled, his face flushed with anger. He didn't bother greeting anyone. He just stared at me, his eyes blazing. "You really are a traitor. You're tearing apart your own family's company." I took a deep breath and rose from my chair. "Father, please sit." He refused at first, standing rigidly with his fists clenched. I gestured for Miguel and Hannah to leave the room, then slowly pulled out the chair across from me. "If you want to talk, then let's talk openly." After a few seconds, he dropped heavily into the chair, his eyes still burning as if they could set me on fire. "You stole my clients. You lured away my people. You've done everything you can to destroy Carter and Daughters. Do you think that makes you proud?" I opened my laptop, turned the screen toward him, and spoke calmly. "You call it betrayal, I call it fair competition. And here are the facts." I clicked, and charts appeared. In the past 2 years, Carter and Daughters' revenue has fallen 40%. Profit margins once at 10% are now down to 2%. Loyal clients, those who stayed for more than a decade, have left at a rate of 70%. I paused, locking eyes with him. "You can deny me, but you cannot deny the numbers." His face shifted, but he still tried to cling to an excuse. "This is all because of you. You stole clients, you played dirty behind my back." I gave a cold, thin smile. If Summit weren't better, they never would have left Carter and Daughters. Do you want to know why they chose me? I clicked to the next slide, revealing Summit's figures. In the same period, Summit grew 300%. Our profit margin is 20%. Our client return rate is 95%. Do you see the difference? Not because I stole anything, but because we deliver better. More transparent, more modern, more respectful. His hands trembled, but he said nothing. I pressed on, my voice firm. I'm not standing in the background anymore. I am the one they trust. I don't just crunch numbers, I lead an entire team. And the most important part is this. I did it without your favoritism, without your hand propping me up. I earned it all on my own. He suddenly shot to his feet, his voice sharp and cutting. You think you're so great, you only have what you have because you learned it from me. Without Carter and Daughters, where would you have gotten your experience? Your clients? I met his gaze, and a wave of pain mixed with pride rose inside me. You're right, I did learn from Carter and Daughters, but I didn't learn favoritism. I didn't learn how to deny the people who deserve a chance. What I learned were all the mistakes you made, and I made sure never to repeat them. You turned me into the support girl, the one behind the scenes, never strong enough. But that is exactly what pushed me to prove I could be stronger than you ever imagined. The air in the room grew thick. He stared at me, his breathing heavy. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, anger, hurt, maybe even acknowledgement. I couldn't be sure, but I knew my words had struck him. You think strength is authority, yelling at workers, making others bow down. I believe strength is the courage to change, the courage to be transparent, the courage to take responsibility and carry it. And you know what? Clients, employees, and the market have already proven I'm strong enough. Not you. He stood there, silent, his hands falling slack at his sides. I slowly closed my laptop, rose to my feet, and said firmly, I'm not just strong enough to lead. I am stronger by far because I don't need favoritism to survive. 1. Those words echoed through the silent room like the final hammer driving shut the door between me and my family. My father sat there, his eyes weary, his shoulders slumped, as if he had just realized he had lost not only the company, but also the chance to witness his daughter grow into the leader he had always denied her the right to be. Just a few months after that confrontation in Summit's office, what I had long predicted came true. Carter and Daughters, once considered the pride of my family, officially filed for bankruptcy. The news spread quickly throughout Chicago's construction community. They could no longer pay their workers, the bank loans had come due without repayment, suppliers were demanding money relentlessly. The once busy office now stood empty, the Carter and Daughters sign torn down, leaving a scarred outline on the gray wall. For many, it was simply the collapse of a business. For me, it was the symbol of an era ending, an era my father had built on favoritism and his refusal to acknowledge my efforts. Vanessa, the so-called perfect daughter in my parents' eyes, no longer held her glow either. She had been raised on indulgence, accustomed only to dressing elegantly for events and saying the right words to charm a crowd. But when the company crumbled, no client needed her smile anymore. I heard she managed to secure a minor managerial job at a furniture company, earning barely half of what she once made at Carter and Daughters. More importantly, she was no longer called the successor CEO or the face of the company. The reputation my father had so carefully built around her shattered, revealing the truth at last. Vanessa had never possessed the real ability to lead. As for my father, he still clung to what little pride he had left. But when the assets were liquidated, the family's Michigan Lake house was sold off, and his loyal employees left one by one, he was left with few choices. One evening, as I was in the office reviewing the progress of a new project, my phone rang. Seeing Dad on the screen, I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. His voice was hoarse, weary. Olivia, I wanted to ask, does Summit need a site supervisor? I still have experience. I stayed silent for a long time. Memories flooded back the times he dismissed my efforts, the family dinners filled only with praise for Vanessa, and that 60th birthday night when he denied me so publicly. I took a deep breath and replied firmly. If you work here, you are just an employee like everyone else. No special treatment, no privileges. If you make mistakes, you'll be held accountable fairly. Do you accept that? On the other end of the line, there was a long pause. Then I heard him sigh. I understand. End. When my father joined Summit, I placed Miguel, the man he had once belittled, in charge of supervising him directly. No one called him boss anymore. He was simply Frank, an experienced site supervisor who had to report and follow procedures like everyone else. Over time, I began to see him change. He arrived at sites early, worked diligently, and no longer carried the air of commanding authority. Once, I overheard workers whisper, "Mr. Frank is different now. It seems he's finally learned to respect others." I said nothing, but quietly took note. 1 year after Carter and Daughters officially filed for bankruptcy, Summit Construction Solutions entered an entirely new era. We had just signed a contract to renovate a major hospital in the Chicago suburbs, valued at $15 million, the largest project in our history. As I put pen to the thick agreement, my hand trembled slightly, not out of fear but from a deep, overwhelming emotion. From a small 500-square-foot office with 3 second-hand wooden desks, Summit had grown into a name mentioned in boardrooms of leading healthcare corporations. I remembered how my father once told me I was not strong enough to lead, and yet here I was, guiding a team of 35 people through multi-million-dollar projects in a field he had never dared to enter. But Summit's rapid growth didn't make me forget something crucial. I, too, needed a place of balance. I bought a small house by Lake Michigan, about an hour's drive from downtown Chicago. The house wasn't large, just a little garden in front and a path leading down to a soft sandy beach. On weekends, I spent hours with my hands in the soil, planting lavender and cherry tomatoes. Watching new shoots push through the earth day by day gave me a peace that money and success could never buy. It was then I realized that strength doesn't only come from running a company, it also comes from knowing when to stop, breathe, and cherish the small things. I also began attending therapy regularly. At first, it was difficult to open up, but over time I learned to name the wounds I had carried for so many years: rejection, favoritism, and the feeling of being dismissed. I learned how to say no to my family without guilt, something I had never dared to do before. When my mother called, trying to pull me back into those hollow Sunday dinners, I said plainly, "I'm busy, and I need to spend time on myself." When Vanessa texted asking for financial help after her new job fell apart, I replied simply, "You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." No more sleepless nights questioning whether I was being unfilial or heartless. I finally understood that setting boundaries was not selfish, it was an act of self-love. At Summit's office, I hung a small sign right next to the reception desk. Written in white chalk, it read, "Family doesn't mean control, boundaries mean strength." Every new employee who walked through the door saw those words first. Some asked me why I had chosen that message. I simply smiled and said, "Because it's the most important lesson of my life. We can't choose our family, but we can choose not to let them control us." Many clients noticed the sign too. Some even took photos and posted them online, saying it reminded them of their own stories. I never shared my past, but deep down I knew the message wasn't just for me, it was for anyone who had ever been trapped under the weight of blind expectations. My family had changed too, or more accurately, they were forced to. At the rare gatherings we had, no one mentioned Vanessa as a star anymore. Instead, they looked at me, asked about Summit, about my thoughts on green building trends or the new hospital contract. The uncomfortable silence that used to hang in the air had turned into a quiet acknowledgement, even if no one said it out loud. My father still worked at Summit, but now he came to the construction sites in a reflective vest and hard hat like everyone else, and in front of employees he called me boss. Sometimes I caught him standing alone, staring up at the Summit sign with a distant look in his eyes, but when he noticed me watching, he would simply nod. I knew then it was his way of admitting the truth. Late, but sincere. On weekend nights, when I locked the office after a long day, I often paused for a few minutes, looking at the whiteboard where I once scribbled my very first plans. I remember the version of myself 10 years ago, the girl dismissed as the support girl, the one buried in paperwork, told she was too weak to lead. And then I look around, the spacious office, the dedicated employees, the multi-million-dollar projects waiting in the pipeline. I smile. I have come a long way, from the shadows of rejection to the light of self-definition. The final image I want to hold on to is not the moment of signing big contracts or the applause in meetings, but the simple moment of closing my office door, hearing the lock click, and stepping into the night streets of Chicago. The wind blowing in from Lake Michigan is cold and free. I know now that from this day forward, I never need to prove I am strong enough for anyone else. I have rewritten the definition of strength. It is intelligence, it is perseverance, and most of all, it is the courage to set boundaries to protect yourself. I am no longer the weak daughter. I am Olivia Carter, and I have become the leader of my own life. If there is one message I want to leave with anyone listening to my story, it is this. You do not need anyone else to define strength for you. You may have been labeled all your life as too weak, not good enough, or meant to stand behind others. But the truth is, strength doesn't come from hollow praise or privileges handed down by someone else. Real strength lives in your intellect, your persistence, and your ability to draw the line that protects your worth. I once believed that love and recognition from my family were everything until I realized the greater truth, learning to believe in yourself, even when no one else does. So, if you are being dismissed, abandoned, or unfairly compared, remember this. You have the power to rewrite your own story. No one can take away your light unless you let them. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again in the next family story, airing daily on the channel Familial Stories Exposed.